So welcome to the third Listen Town Hall. Super excited about this. Awesome to see so many people here already. And I know that that number is going to keep going up as we go on. So if you are here right now, it means that you're enrolled in Kindred and you're a Listen member, and that's great. Kindred is building a network of data-enabled people who have been impacted by COVID and who want to contribute to research in partnership with leading scientists. In that regard, if you haven't yet already connected your data on Kindred, I highly recommend that you do so. Data is pretty much required for research across the board. So on Kindred, what's so cool is that you have access to it and you can send that directly to the researchers. You can have, it's not sent or shared with anyone without your explicit consent. Normally in research, they have to manually ask from your providers and then they'll send it over and it takes a really long time. So this really speeds up the research process. Again, super excited to have you all here. Your input and perspectives are imperative for the research that they're doing in the Listen study. So really without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to the study investigators. We have Drs. Harlan Krumholtz and Akiko Abisaki, and then study coordinators Bornali and Cesar. So.
Hi, I'll just start. Hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you so much for coming. This is such a delight to be able to have a chance to interact with people who've already joined the study, people who are participating with us. So here's the idea today is what we want to do is actually make this a highly interactive session, just to talk to you a little bit about what's going on with the Listen study, what we're trying to accomplish, and to listen to you for ideas and thoughts about what's next and how we can get to the place that we want to be. The intent was to try to create a learning community, a bunch of people who are committed to trying to provide information about themselves, to also provide ideas and suggestions, and to work with the team, the Yale team, and others who might ultimately work with us, like David Petrino and others who are interested in this kind of work, and so that we can make a move forward, that we could actually make some progress. And I know all of you probably are as frustrated as we are, probably more frustrated that the progress has been so slow. Both we would like this study to go faster and the research around us. So let's think together what it would take to make that happen. One of the first things I want to do is just sort of flash up a slide about some of the issues that we're facing, because I want to hear what you think about how we can move forward. It's going to be about data and connections and number of people. And I say the good news is the Kindred community is now at almost 3,000. The number of people who've joined from Kindred into Listen, about half or so, maybe a little bit more, have joined in. And again, the way it works is nothing happens with your data without your permission. If you're in Kindred and you've been answering questions, the Yale study, Listen, won't have access to that information unless you provide explicit consent and actually join officially. And then with that, our data scientists, our researchers are able to work with the data. And what we want to be able to start doing, we've been sort of waiting to accumulate enough people to be able to make some sort of descriptive analysis so that we could share back with you. We were trying to get adequate numbers so that it would actually mean something. Meanwhile, there is this other part of the study, which we'll talk about also, which is trying to take select individuals who particularly are representative of the kind of health challenges that all of you are facing, and see whether or not, through the great work that's being done in Akiko Iwasaki's lab, begin to develop some immunophenotyping profiles of people, and to understand whether or not there's a correlation between the kind of symptoms people are exhibiting and the way in which these thousands of measures of the immune system that we might be able to make sort of reflect. And then also, how about compared to people who don't have long COVID or vaccine injury? And can we begin to understand how these different groups look? Can we begin to move towards diagnostic tests based on the findings, and ultimately targets for therapeutic interventions that are strongly evidence-based? So this is kind of the way that we've proceeded. I also want to talk just for a little bit as we move on around some of the thoughts about trying to create subgroups within the Listen community. So what if we were to, for example, pull together groups of people who had these sort of internal vibrations and tremors that have been characterized? We had written a preprint about a bunch of people who had exhibited this, and were contacted quite often by people who have this symptom. It's not very well characterized. And we believe that maybe we should, be pulling together a sort of smaller group that all has that kind of symptom, or POTS, for example, the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome that many people also exhibit. Anyway, the idea is, should we be trying to create these subsets that are a little more homogeneous with regard to their experience, and then dig deeper into that? So we want to talk with you about that idea also, and see what you think. Vaccine injury is another natural one to kind of really focus in on, and see whether or not there's evidence of certain signals that might help us to understand this. By the way, for some of you in the long COVID community, and we've heard this, so I just want to mention it. They've asked, well, why is vaccine injury people here? Why are they included in the LISTEN study? And then some people have even expressed concern, and all the vaccine injured people all know this very well, where people are saying like, well, is this a part of anti-vaxxer? What's going on with this? And I just want to say to people on the long COVID side, because you may not have heard us talk about this, is that we've been in contact with many people who were vaccinated, not anti-vaxxers. These are people who got vaccinated, and soon afterwards began to report symptoms that in many ways were very similar to the kind of symptoms that many people in the long COVID community were also reporting, but some ways different, and but devastating to their lives, and were found themselves in a position where, because of the politics or because of a whole range of different issues, people wouldn't talk to them or wouldn't help them. And a lot of scientists wanted to steer clear of them because people were concerned about what it would mean to, around the perception and so forth. And for us, and let me say, Kiko was very clear about this. I was very clear about this from the beginning. We want to bring good, strong science to this. And we saw people who were suffering, and we want to avoid politics around this. We want to try to get to how can we help people resume their lives, and how can we address that suffering. And because there were some similarity to the symptoms, plus we were set up in the LISTEN study to be able to characterize a new emerging condition, and try to figure out what it is. They had the same challenges that people with long COVID did, which is no diagnostic test, many people not believing them, being put in a position where their symptoms were being discounted, even though they knew that they were really their lives had experienced something quite dramatic and devastating. So then that's why we expanded the study to be inclusive of them, and believe they deserve the same respect that that people in the long COVID community do, and we need to be able to work together constructively and scientifically to proceed. So anyway, I wanted to say that because that had been raised to me, and some people on the long COVID side may have wondered about that. So I wanted to say why we've been inclusive and welcoming, and why we're working together to relieve suffering. And so that's why we brought them in. So let me just go to this issue about the enrollment side. Cesar, do you mind putting up?
Yeah.
And then I'll make a few comments about overall what we think we've learned, and then we'll go to these various parts. And if you've got questions or thoughts as we go along, please write them down. So the status so far is that, so I said maybe there are 3,000 people in Kindred. Among the people in Kindred, you can see here, this is as of February 23rd, 1519 have enrolled in LISTEN. So this is a little bit of a disappointment, by the way, because my belief was that most people joined Kindred in an effort to join a research study. I mean, I would have thought a higher percentage of people were motivated on that. Maybe that's our problem. Maybe we need to communicate better to folks what it is that we're doing and what this transition is. We know, and on the Hugo side, we know, look, I hope you'll be patient with us. We're iterating, trying to improve, trying to take in comments. Leslie can talk about that at some point, or Talia. But it's we're trying to get stronger, but maybe the messaging needs to be clear. But only about half the people who joined Kindred moved over. And then you can see there are 500 people with these are all like, remember the initial questionnaire where it's sort of asking, what you have, what you're experiencing, and 500 are reporting long COVID only. Interestingly, there are almost 300 people who are reporting a combination of long COVID and vaccine injury. There's another reason to be welcoming into this study, to open it up more broadly, because actually there are people who believe that they had long COVID, who report having long COVID, and then report also believing and experiencing after the vaccine that there was another thing that happened to them that compounded it. So in many cases, this isn't just that whether the vaccine exacerbated the underlying long COVID, but they believe it, that they feel it and experience it as something different. 325 people with vaccine only. We went out for a call. We really need some controls. So we have 204 people with controls. And then you may say like, well, how do you have unknown, 238 unknown? And this is because, I mean, people can skip those questions or they can not be filling out the questionnaire. So one of the things I want to talk and think with you about and appreciate be your note here about finding the website confusing. So let's figure this out. Like, let's work this out together about what we do to make things less confusing. In fact, not confusing at all, and really much more straightforward. We're really committed to that. But on the survey response rate, you can see that, remember that there were a variety of questionnaires, and we weren't sure how to do this. It's always this balance because we want detailed information on everyone. That's how we characterize people. And by the way, for some of these conditions, that's why I'm saying it may make sense to develop like subgroups, because you want to go really deeply and understand like what's the experience, what is it that people are facing every day, and what are the limitations and so forth. And even these questionnaires don't really get to the level of detail that you'd like to get to, but we try to make compromise. These questionnaires, by the way, that are up on the Kindred site were done in collaboration with some of you and others. In other words, it wasn't just like researchers just saying, what do we want to ask people, but we tried to work hard. And many of you know this, we went back and forth with groups. Denise, you were wonderful and helped us a lot. And so did a lot of other people, giving us feedback, helping us to figure out what should go into these questions, recognizing that there are trade-offs between the volume. And also many of you have got fatigue. It's not easy. You have trouble concentrating. So like, just add that on, to all of this. How do we balance this? And then one of the things we decided to do, basically because we were told by people who were facing these conditions that we need to divide this up. It can't be like one large questionnaire. It's too daunting, too intimidating, too hard. And so that's why we tried to divide it into, these various ones that you could march through. Plus, on any given one, if you stop, you can restart at that point. And we thought maybe that would be better. But what's happened is that, so people joined Listen, and then not everyone who joined Listen actually even filled out all the basic information in the first questionnaire, the basic information questionnaire. And then we had the survey on survey questions of non-medical factors, on conditions and symptoms. I know it's long, that one about symptoms. And by the way, the vaccine injury people let us know that we neglected, there was a longer group of questions for long COVID than there were vaccine injury. We've tried to remedy that. On the Kindred side, remember, these are all questions that are given on Kindred. And then if you agree to come into Listen, you're sharing those responses. And by the way, just the Hugo philosophy, I know Tali said this, but just to reiterate, everything you fill out goes into your data assets and nothing gets moved without your permission. So it's essentially, you have what we say agency over your own data. And there's no other side to this where data gets sold or monetized or anything. Nothing moves without your permission. But, so you filling out things on the Kindred side, and the Kindred team had sort of put these, when I said we, I guess I should tell you which hat I'm wearing. When I'm wearing that hat, it was like on the Kindred side, the Hugo hat, working with people to try to figure out what should the community's questions be. And lots of people, many people on this call perhaps, participate in helping to define that. But you got 91% filled out the first one, but then you go to non-medical factors, you're only at 2/3. Conditions and symptoms, you're getting close to only half. Therapies, about 3/4. So it makes it difficult. In a usual top-down, highly hierarchical medical study, you're getting pounded from people who are in the study for you to fill out questionnaires, and it's very regimented. This was saying like, well, what about a community? What if we built a community? And the idea was, in good faith, people would fill out these surveys to characterize themselves and be willing to share them into the studies. But this just limits us a lot. So we have 1,500 people, but when you start getting down to the number of people who've actually provided information were at a much lower thing. So one of the questions we wanted to ask you was, what should we be doing about this? How can we help to address this, communicate? And also, what should we be doing on our side? Maybe we should be doing preliminary analyses just to show good faith on our side of what it is we're trying to do. And at this point, this is just simple characterization of the cohort. And it's also helping in the selection of people that are being sent to the lab so that that we can help select people who are going to get the immunophenotyping. But one of the other big things that's important is the way that it was working is we believe that it was very important to connect to the digital electronic health record data, because that's also going to supplement the self-reported information. And many of you have had an abundance of testing. Now, some of that testing may have occurred in places that don't have portals or we can't connect to, but a lot of it has occurred within mainstream medical institutions, which we can bring in so that, again, brings in your data assets, and that you then would be in a position to share into the LISTEN study. And we're at a little less than a third of people have actually made even one connection. And many of you have got connections in multiple places. So again, this is not about saying this isn't a criticism. This is about, well, I think if anything, we need to be working with Hugo. We now Yale hat working with Hugo team to figure out, like, what would we have to do to get people to get this number up to 80 or 90%, so that all the people who are in LISTEN have got data that's streaming in that we can, again, with your permission. And when you're giving permission into the study, you're giving it for the singular purpose that, we're doing this study. So again, it's not like, the data goes into Yale study, and then again, no one's monetizing, no one's trading on your stuff. It's about trying to just move as rapidly as possible to try to get some answers. And to there's another agenda I have, by the way, which is raising awareness with real data about the real life experience of people. I mean, I'm saying if we want to position ourselves to really be able to make these insights, then we need to be getting all this stuff lined up and getting it to work. There's also, I'll just signal that at least on the long COVID side, we hope that we are going to be able to launch what's still a relatively small trial of Paxlovid for long COVID, extended dose, 15 days. I'm just saying that because it's in the public record. It's on clinicaltrials.gov. I'm restricted by the IRB. They're just approving now, like, what we can go public with. So saying this will also be important because people coming in the trial will need to be connected to the records and also filling out surveys and so forth. And so we need to get smart about how to do this. Otherwise, the research won't be respected. We will have trouble getting attention to it. People will think this method doesn't work as well as it should. And we should be defaulting back to the old days of very hierarchical approaches, and not one where we're really working with the community. So maybe we'll go around, and Bornali also, maybe you can say a word or two about, just to people can know that we're inviting people for the bloods. But one of the things that I'll say, a couple quick things. One of the things that's true, by the way, is that we have a really interesting community that's assembled both in Kindred and in LISTEN. And I say that because generally very activated. Even though I'm bringing up this issue about completion, we have heard from a lot of people. There's a lot of engagement. And by the way, this is a group that is suffering. I mean, when we look at their overall health scores, it's reflective of what you guys have in your lived experience. If you ask people, remember the one that was like, say what your health is from 0 to 100. And if you did that in the nation at large, which some people have chronic conditions, so forth, you end up in the 80s on average, just as representative sample people in the United States. But but in our group, we're around 50. It's profoundly depressed. No surprise to anyone here. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but it is of note that we've brought together a lot of people who are suffering. And that's why I think when we hear the stories, when we interact with people who are in this position, we really want to make a difference. So we should be asking. One of the intents in the beginning on the Kindred side was to hear, like, here's some really important things that we should be learning and seeing if we can put out new questionnaires. But we're worried about doing that, given that we're having trouble getting people to fill out the basic ones. this idea about the smaller subgroups of people who've got, a whole group of people, having a town hall, for example, for people with internal tremors and vibrations, and talking about like, what can we do to move this group forward, even though it'll be smaller. And then also just alerting you like that we are beginning this issue with the labs and reaching out to some people. And I know some people expressed interest in this. I think that's great. We love hearing from you. We're also just in the beginning trying to identify some, you were trying to get good at this, and mostly the workflow, not the lab is good at this, but I mean, the challenge is the workflow. How do we identify people and to bring them across? And then many of you have asked, can I get all of that information back? And I should make a comment about that, which is we want to share as much as possible with everyone. But again, the regulatory environment prohibits us from sharing some things back. So when they are lab test experimental, the regulatory authorities, and the IRB is an example of this, but has said they're worried that because we're not at the same standards of a clinical test, right? They're laboratory tests. We're doing thousands of them, and they're worried people may make decisions based on lab tests that really aren't ready for prime time yet with regard to clinical use. And so our hands are tied for some things. Don't think it's for lack of interest in being able to return as much as we can, but we can return some things. And we're going to return everything we can, but just know that the constraints are not our wish to do it. The constraints are our mandate to be regulatorily compliant. So that's where we have to do that. And we can try to be clear about this and show you what can be returned and so forth. I mean, those are all things. I don't know. I didn't mean to pick on you, Bornali. I mean, I don't know if you want to say anything about what we're doing, and I want to then hand over to Kiko to make any comments that she wants to make, or Cesar and so forth. But anyway, again, I want to express deep gratitude, let some others just say a few words, and then maybe we can just pick out some things that may be coming across on the chat that we can talk about. But thank you so much. And there's one more thing, which is there is a there's a email. Many of you know it already, but I know Cesar, the email is listenstudy@yale.edu. Isn't that it?
That's correct. I'll put it in the chat.
You'll put it in the chat. So, we're not afraid to have a lot of people email us. So it's, and we do our best. It's hard sometimes to keep up with everything, but we do our best to try to do that. I know maybe I should go to you, Kiko, next. Do you want to? And go ahead. You're really, most people join to hear you, not me. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Harlan, for the great description of what's happening. And I also enrolled in Listen, and I've also, struggled to kind of fill out the forms in a timely manner because I wasn't checking the email, or I wasn't checking the right websites and so on. But eventually I was able to fill all the surveys. So it may not be very intuitive, because when you first log in, you may not see all the surveys at once. It's like giving sequentially. And so you would have to kind of follow, fill out one survey and then to the next, and so on. So I'm also experiencing what you've gone through together. And I'm also going to be, providing my biospecimen next week. So I'm very excited about that. So I'll be able to.
I just want to interrupt 1 second, because we did change the survey thing, just so people know. It's been updated just because of everyone's experience. So now when people enroll and Listen, they'll get, or when they enroll in Kindred, they get the baseline survey. And once they've completed the baseline survey, within 24 hours, all the other surveys will come in and they can answer them at any time. And the story survey is now a diary. It stays in their task list at all time, forever. So people can continually update that. So just to clarify, we actually heard everybody's issues, and we hopefully have fixed that problem. So thank you for feedback from everyone on that.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. That's great. So it's already been updated and improved. Wonderful. Yeah, and so with respect to what the data that we already have from you, thank you. We are starting to sample, recruit some of you to look at vaccine injury. We're also needing more controls. That's sort of where the kind of hurdle is right now. We have a lot of great people who've contributed to the vaccine injury group. There's over 300 people who are already enrolled in Listen. The controls are increasing. Thank you to all the people who are enrolling as a control group, but we need more. So if you could, ask your friends or family or whoever to consider enrolling in this study, that would be great. And then there are some, so we are working around the clock as much as we can, but there are some things that take time. For example, we have to collect enough samples to do certain assays. So we can, some of the assays we do real time. As soon as we get the samples, we can measure them. But others, we would need to do it in batches, hopefully one batch, to be able to compare one value versus another. And those things we're accumulating until we have enough samples so we can do those types of analyses. So for everything to come together to inform us and to be able to analyze that group, vaccine injury versus long COVID versus healthy control, these are going to take a little while. So please bear with us. Research is, unfortunately, it cannot be done instantaneously, but we're doing it very, very carefully and collecting enough matched controls. And Bornali is the hero in that. She's really amazing. She's looking through the data to find people who are suitable matches for the vaccine injury group as well as the long COVID group. So yeah, we're very excited. We've also, I know that some of you asked about the microclot analyses. We have begun to do that for the cohort. So now we are doing things that are already in the preprint, as well as microclots and platelet activation analyses. That's done in real time. So we are also looking at some of those things. And we'll be accumulating, of course, more number in order to be able to share anything with you, but just know that we are incorporating newer things like that, as well as looking at circulating spike protein and other aspects. So we are adapting and we are incorporating new ideas and new things that are suggested by you, as well as others in the field. You want to comment?
Yeah, just the only thing. So for the subset that we are selecting for sample collection, so after the biospecimen collection, on the same day, we actually send you 2 surveys, which we request you to fill in. It's very helpful because we get to know your present status. So it would be very nice if you comply with the study design and also fill up those surveys. And as Akiko has mentioned, we are selecting a subset right now in order to do the collection. And we definitely need more controls to do proper statistical analysis before we tell you anything. So that's the basic idea. So there were a few questions, Akiko and Harlan, to the study email, and I have promised them that we'll find some answers through you. So I could start with 3 questions, and Talia also had a few questions that she has mentioned. So I could start with the first one, Talia, and then we'll go back to the questions that you have as well.
And one thing, Bornali, I just wanted to also say, I noticed some people also offered their help and interest, and so I just want to say thank you for that. And if people put that in there, and we'll route it to the proper place, whether it's Hugo or us or Listen, everything, and we'll try to get back to people who express that. So thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Bornali.
Yeah. So the first question is for both of you, actually. So here is a participant who says that I would like to make a suggestion. I believe there are likely quite a few people like me who are not sure definitively how they ended up with long COVID-like symptoms. We have never had a positive test result for COVID, and it's quite possible we had only minor short-lived symptoms or were asymptomatic. We are vaccinated, but our symptoms did not immediately appear in response to the vaccination either. So we are left to select vaccine injury as our likely cause, even though we do not know for sure that's what triggered our issues. I just hate to overcount vax injuries, especially given the current politics and disinformation war around vaccines, or undercount long COVID cases unless and until we know for sure what triggered the symptoms in people like me. Not sure if it changes the questions asked of us as a part of the study.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We struggle with that as well, because especially during the early phase of COVID, there wasn't enough testing available. for people to know if they had COVID or not. And also even later on, as the questioner says, the mild or asymptomatic infections, one may not be going to the doctors to get tested or getting an antigen test to do themselves. So it is a little ambiguous. There isn't a clear-cut way of distinguishing what may have led to the long COVID-like symptoms either. The anti-nucleocapsid antibody, which is only generated after infection, tend to wane quickly. So if we capture that, that's great. We're doing all of these assays, by the way. If we capture the anti-nucleocapsid antibody in somebody who claims to have had vaccine injury, we should be able to distinguish that may not be just vaccine injury, but that may be long COVID and or vaccine or not. But those are not perfect. Like I said, those anti-nucleocapsid antibodies don't last very long. So if we don't capture that blood samples during the time of duration of that antibody, we still wouldn't know. But we are going to be looking at this as a group to see what we are finding. There are clearly some people with only vaccine injury, and clearly some people who have only long COVID, and there are people with both. So we're going to be comparing immune phenotype in those three versus the control to see if there's any unique features. And maybe in the future, we can tell you what you may have had if we find a clear signature. We may not find it, but it's very important for us to kind of be able to study this. So the labeling is tricky because none of us for sure know we're never exposed to COVID or not. We know that we've gotten the vaccines or not. That's easier, but the COVID part is a little tricky. But nevertheless, we will be looking at everything we have in hand to be able to distinguish whether someone has had COVID and or vaccines.
And I'll just add one quick thing, which is that you're raising an important issue, which is we shouldn't be forcing people into a response. And if people say, I think I've got something, but I'm not sure exactly what it is, I have to go back to the survey. But remember I was saying the unknown. Well, there's some people who haven't filled it out. Those are unknown, but we should allow people to say, like, I don't know what I've got. Like I might have one or the other and it's uncertain. So we can go back and look and see if we can improve the surveys. Obviously, with a lot of people have already filled out things, but you are raising an important point that sometimes surveys can force you to answer something which it doesn't really capture the reality for you. So we have to be thoughtful about that.
So here is another question. It is regarding COVID in little children. And one of the participants has asked this question. I have read papers explaining why COVID is usually mild in kids under 5, but I cannot find any follow-up studies about possible sequels after 6, 12, 18 months after mild infection in kids. Do you have any information or references about sequels in the medium term in little kids after mild infections?
Yeah, so the studies on late time points that the questioner is asking is not yet available, but there are studies that have looked at 4 weeks time point and a little bit further beyond. There's a paper in Lancet Children's Health,
yes.
That looked at like 44,000 children who had COVID or not, and they followed their symptoms over time. And there were, in the group of 0 to 3 years old, there was an increased incidence of symptoms in people who had children who had COVID versus those who didn't, the matched controls. So there is some evidence that at least for the short term, there seems to be an increased incidence of these symptoms. And the types of symptoms actually also differed between different age groups. But that's just one of the studies. There are other studies with smaller numbers that are also looking at those sequelae in children. But I would have to say it's a lot less studied than adult population. And so, yeah, we would really need more studies on that in the future to figure out what percentage of the children are having these kinds of symptoms later on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't have anything to add to that. That's great.
Harlan, one question I think I read here was in the text here. So the question is, are you going to classify long COVID into cardiovascular, pulmonary, neurologic per se, or are you going to look at symptoms and look at symptom clusters?
I think it's a really good question. I mean, what's the best? We've been discussing this at length. You know, what is the best method of organizing people who just say let's just take long COVID. You could say the whole group, you know. So what's the best way to classify people? Because in one of the ways we've thought about it is sort of the cluster of symptoms that people are experiencing. You know, there's some people who have a solitary symptom, and there's some people that have a wide range of symptoms. And for some people, there are patterns in which these range of symptoms appear. So it's not, you know, just one or the other. I think one of the problems in medicine in general is that we've siloed it too much. You know, is it cardiovascular, is it pulmonary, is it neurologic, when there's tons of overlap around some of these conditions, and there's interactions. I mean, you've got the, you know, there's mind-body interactions. There's things that are going on neurologically that can, what is POTS, by the way? I mean, is it a neurologic disease or is it a cardiovascular disease? And, you know, the truth is it's a combination of the diseases. So, you know, I think what we need to do is to do it. We're going to end up doing it a bunch of different ways, right? Like, what if we just look at this? But like, for example, it just seemed to us, it's jumping out at us that, like, yeah, we probably should get a bunch of people together and have this internal vibration. Some of them have a lot of other symptoms, some of them don't, but this is a distinctive symptom. And, you know, let's see if we can try to understand that. Same with POTS, but I mean, we're open to your thoughts too about what seem like natural clusters in organization of this. So anyway, open to your thoughts.
Thank you, Harlan. Talia, I will hand it over to you so that you can ask the questions you had listed.
Sure. So some of you sent some questions to me beforehand. Thank you so much for doing that. And we have time now to read a few of them. So first I have one, how much of a problem are errors in my medical records going to pose? I've been aware of errors in my medical records going back to the first appointments I sought after my vaccine injury. Some doctors have recorded incorrect information in their clinic notes, including symptoms and even diagnosis. It continues, but that's pretty much the basis of it.
Well, and I mean, this is a really good question. All of you know that especially for people who are in this group, you know, that first of all, careful documentation about symptoms and information is critical, and is not always accurately documented. So the thought is that there's a hierarchy with regard to the quality of the information that's in the medical record. And so, for example, testing, laboratory testing, especially that which has to undergo CLIA, you know, sort of under CLIA, which is this federal standardization of laboratory testing across institutions. I mean, that's pretty good to be able to look across. And then, you know, even when you're getting imaging tests, I mean, there's often some variation even among radiologists and so forth. So you have to be able to take it a bit with a grain of salt. But yeah, I mean, I think we have to be open-minded about how accurate some of these representations are. But we're going to start with what they call structured data. So structured data in the medical record is going to more be information that is coming up, you know, out of lab tests, and we also can look at medications. Even there could be mistakes in medication. We know this. So that's why I often say the gold standard is the patient report, because that's what you feel. When we ask you, how do you feel? There's no other gold standard beyond how you feel. But yeah, we have to be thoughtful about the quality of the data that's in the medical record and act accordingly. So, I mean, all I can do is acknowledge to you that we know this. We know this both from our experience as clinicians. We know this from our experience as researchers. So we recognize that there can be noise introduced into this as a result of errors. So, you know, we just have to take that into account.
There's a question in the chat actually that I think is super interesting. Can we enroll our kids in the study?
So I think we have great interest in looking across the entire spectrum, including kids, but the study becomes a lot more complicated, especially the way this study is structured in terms of the permissionings. So, you know, this listen study is built on an e-consent system, and we couldn't really do an e-consent for children. And then the question is, how would it be administered? Because depending on the age of the child. I mean, adolescents certainly could interact with questionnaires, but as you start getting younger, you can't really do that. So I think at this point, we felt like it's a big enough hill to climb to see if we can like work this out to be able to produce some knowledge. But I think we hope at some point that we can do that, but we're not doing it at this stage. So it's 18 and older for the Listen study at this point. And again, in part, we're trying to minimize some of the complexities, but recognize that there's great need to study and understand what's going on in kids, as Akiko said before.
So we have another one. What specific elevated cytokines are you seeing? Have you noticed a difference between long haul COVID and vaccine injured? I had my cytokines tested several times and new ones, IL-13 showed up for the first time. Why would this happen?
So obviously Kiko's going to answer this, but just to make sure, Kiko, we know that we have to be careful about sharing actual results from the study yet, but I know you've got a lot of thoughts about this.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we don't have anything to share yet because, as I said, there are some factors like cytokines that need to be analyzed once together, all together. So the samples have to be collected, enough number of the samples in control groups as well as different long COVID groups. So we haven't done the cytokines yet, but we have done cytokine studies in our previous work with David Petrino, where we do see some elevation of certain cytokines and activated T cell phenotypes and so on, which I have shared with you in the previous town hall. But IL-13, it's interesting because it's a type 2 cytokine that we associate with allergy and Helminth's infection. So that's the kind of cytokines that we are also seeing in the Petrino study, that my long COVID study, where type 2 immune cells, which are not typically, which not useful for antiviral defense, are being elevated in many of the long COVID patients. And that may be reflecting in what the questioner's cytokine panel is showing. But the other thing to keep in mind is that cytokines, the type of cytokines that come up and down in long COVID, at least, are different depending on the time from the infection. So earlier studies that have looked at cytokines at, let's say, weeks from infection versus 6 months, 8 months, the kinds of cytokines that are elevated and maintained high in the long COVID differ. So again, that also speaks to the importance of looking at post-COVID issues at different time points to see what we're capturing, because I think the disease is evolving. And in some cases, the disease gets much improved and people recover. And in other cases, they're not recovering. And the type of cytokines that we're seeing also changes over time.
Thank you. Bringing it back to the chat, a lot of people are asking about sending in samples. They want to know if they can just voluntarily send them in, or how they'll know if they're going to be, reached out to send in samples. A lot of people want to send samples.
I'll just say it's great. So we're, like I said, working out how best to do this. Doing this is incur some costs, because the way that we're doing this is people give consent and then we're sending someone out to people's homes or meeting them at a Quest, for example. This entire study is decentralized. I mean, there's several innovative features about this. We're recruiting from a community. We're trying to make it so it's all digital, easy and convenient for people. When we're doing the bloods, we're working. So we've got to, pay for a service to come out, like, to do this. So we're trying to be thoughtful about how do we strategically identify, groups that would help give us the best chance of being able to see signals and learn something about potential targets and diagnostics. And meanwhile, we're continuing to try to raise funds so that we can do larger numbers of individuals. We're at this point have reached out to folks. If you're interested, signal to us, because that makes it easier. Then we know, like, okay, if you meet in every case, we're trying to build some criteria and identify people. And if there are people who are interested, that makes it easier, because it is, I don't know, how much is it, Bernali? It's like 5 vials of blood. It's, people have to be willing to participate and, to have that kind of blood draw. I know most of you have had lots of blood drawn already. By the way, when I'm hearing about people with cytokines, again, another reason why we're trying to get people to connect their records, because it is good for us to take advantage of testing that's occurred elsewhere, just even as if we're looking into folks and trying to understand what's going on. But, you know, I don't know if Akiko, you or Benali has any other comment about it, but if you are interested, we can then keep a note that, like, you know, this is someone who, you know, if there's an opportunity, wants to lean in and be part of that. So we would love that. So feel free to let us know if you're in that, you know, if you feel that way.
But Harlan, why don't you tell them where they should email? Because it's, again, I see this confusion between Kindred and Hugo and Listen. So they should.
Yeah. So for this thing, for Bloods or anything regarding Listen Study, and this is a Listen group, by the way, we didn't open it up to all of Kindred. So only people, this is an internal research meeting, you know, that we're having, and we consider each of you. I mean, and I saw some of you made some, you know, or makes even tough comments about, you know, criticisms or suggestions. We welcome it. You guys are part of the team. That's what we're trying to figure out. How do we conduct a study like this where each of you feels that you're part of the team? And so we hope you feel the opportunity to contribute ideas. And again, we're trying to manage that. We can't do everything, but we're open to it. But this is the Listen Study. And any suggestions that you give us that are about Kindred, we can pass to Kindred, or you can tell Kindred. And that has to do with like some of the comments that were made about the UX and so forth. But for this, and especially about the Bloods, listenstudy@yale.edu, listenstudy@yale.edu is the best way to funnel all of these questions. You know, say, so maybe we can just put it again in the chat, or Emma or someone, just, I know you put it in before, but just we can put it in again. I'm just so happy to see so many comments today. It just like, I can't believe we ever did research differently where we didn't have this opportunity to interact. I wish we could put everyone on the screen. It just sort of actually became a technical issue around how can we do that, and also make sure that, you know, it's lots of people didn't want to come on the screen, by the way. So it's sort of like, what's the best way to balance it? I don't want you to think like it's all about us. It's really, I would prefer to see everyone. That would be so much fun. But that's, for now, this is, you know, the sort of technology that we're dealing with and why we're trying to do that. And I know that, you know, many, like I said, I saw that in the last comment about, you know, impatience and so forth. Yeah, that we should all be impatient, continue to be impatient and unhappy with the progress. I mean, I don't think any of us are happy with the progress. So we're trying to figure out how to do this faster and better. And we're going to be looking for some, you know, resources to continue to expand what we can do.
Yeah, I'm just so grateful that you are willing to participate in the biospecimen donation. That means a lot to us, because that's how we are going to understand the underlying biology behind these diseases. So thank you so much. We really look forward to, you know, if there's a button to click, it's easier, but if you could just email us who's interested, and that way Bornali can also put that in the consideration for future recruitment purposes. So thank you, very grateful.
Tali, other things, anyone else, anything else you want to try to, we have like another, maybe time for one more thing.
I'm on mute. Yes, we have another question. Have you seen elevated VEGF? What is your understanding about why that happens, and what do you suggest?
Yeah, again, we haven't measured the cytokines yet from the Listen cohort, but there are other studies that are looking at those issues, and it does depend on the time of collection. In our myelin COVID study, we're not seeing a huge signal for VEGF, but others have reported some. So I think, again, it's too early to say what that means, but very interested. There's a lot of vascular involvement, obviously, for long COVID and post-vaccine issues. And that's why we are including the microclot and platelet activation analyses in addition to cytokines.
I'll just say something real quick. I just saw a comment about the Nature Medicine article that did try to create this sort of classification system. And they were depending on codes, you know, that was done out of a consortium of institutions. I think I applaud anybody who's trying to add additional information. One of the things we're hoping to be able to do is not just take codes, because if you think the medical records got issues when people are actually coding and labeling with these are billing codes, you know, what people are putting down for billing codes can often be also even more inaccurate, claims studies. And so we, again, glad they did it, but we do think that getting the patient reported information and then triangulating that with some of this other stuff from the electronic record will give us more precise understanding of what people are experiencing. And I think it'll complement what that is. And then ultimately, as Akiko said, I mean, gosh, one of the great privileges for me is to work with her in her lab. And I think, you know, if it's what's desperately needed to understand underlying mechanisms in the biology. So we can work hard to try to characterize people's experience, understand their outcomes, but then, you know, ultimately what we really need to understand is the biology behind this so that we can be able to create testing and treatments that can make a difference.
Do we have time for another question?
Yeah, maybe one last, I guess, last question. How about that?
Okay.
And by the way, people can, I mean, I hope, Talia, like all of these comments, those of us who are doing this haven't been able to, there's lots of content that's been created. So we can also try to answer questions after this to try to post somewhere so people can see answers. So it's not just like who got their questions is, we can look, it's right. We get to keep, we can look over this list afterwards, right, Talia? Is that?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
pre-submitted questions for sure. And I think we can send these questions as well.
Yeah,
We can save
and
the
there were
questions from the
questions in
chat.
the comments so that we can make sure we keep that as an archive so we can address some of that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
for sure.
Go ahead. Last one.
We have one. Has there been communication or collaboration of any sort between our two principal investigators and the FDA vaccine biologics branch or the CDC?
Well, I'll just say I haven't talked specifically with the vaccine branch. I mean, I think we need to generate some insights that we want to share in order to be able to do that. But we have a lot of discussions back and forth with CDC and other groups. I haven't spoken specifically with the vaccine group. I don't know if Kiko, I think we don't have any results yet to share. But I will, I say publicly all the time that, you know, I know that there are people who are suffering who had symptoms develop soon after they got the vaccine, and we need to understand that. And by the way, like I said, two things can be true. The vaccines can be, on average, beneficial for populations and have saved millions of lives. And it still can be true that there are people who've been injured by them. And so we shouldn't be afraid to look into it, but we need to generate some knowledge about this so that we can provide the insight. And also, I just think the idea that people, both on long COVID and for vaccine injury, we just need to help advocate for understanding about what people's lives are like, because I just think people who aren't experiencing what you all are experiencing have so little ability to really appreciate it. And I don't think we have the full ability because we're not living it, but we've heard from so many people that, you know, we've internalized a lot of what people have experienced. You know, Kiko, if you have any comment to that question.
I mean, yeah, thanks to my participation in this group, I now recently gotten a lot of interest from newspaper reporters interested in covering why or how some people are suffering from post-vaccine issues. And I'm not afraid to speak about this issue. As I told you all, like I'm a vaccine researcher. We've been trying to develop safe and effective vaccines for the last 20 years. But I also understand that a small number of people are being affected by the vaccines. And this is a real biological issue that needs to be studied. So there will be hopefully more coverage and more sort of light shining on this group of people, because I think, you know, it's even harder than having long COVID. Long COVID at least is being publicly recognized and discussed, but post-vaccine injury issues are very little discussion is going on. And I think that it's time to change that. And I think this lesson study will allow us to have the right kind of insights to share with the world about this disease. And I think that's a strong way to kind of communicate with the public of what's going on. Yeah.
Well, let me just say we're at the hour. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the Hugo team for setting us up, the Kindred team for helping to support us, our own Listen research team. I want to thank Cesar and Fornali, and especially for me, Akiko, who's just become such a good friend and colleague. And I so appreciate her involvement and help. And you can hear when you hear her talk how important it is that we have her as part of, in your corner. Let me say it like that she's in your corners in addition to being an extraordinary scientist. So this is really great. Talia, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to everyone on the Listen team. This has been another incredible event. I know that your input is just so helpful for the research and hearing everything that you say, and especially your input on the website. Definitely on the Kindred end, we're definitely going to take all of those comments into consideration and see how we can make everything a little bit more intuitive and easier for everyone. Because we want the process to be as simple as possible, so that you're not, turned away from contributing to the research. I did also want to say, I forgot to mention at the beginning, but you can mark your calendars for May 23rd at 6 p.m. Dr. Wes Eli is going to be joining us for Kindred Cafe. So super exciting. A few months out. We have some other, ideas lined up for the months in between, but definitely May 23rd is set. So hope to see you there. And
I think we will run a cafe for the internal vibrations and tremors toward the end of March to try to bring together a group and figure out what people think about that. And again, on all these comments, anything you can give us that helps us to think about how to encourage people to fill out questionnaires. I know we're part of this on the UX, but also to get people connected. All that will be really welcome on our side. We want to hear your suggestions about that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.